Good morning. My name is Omar Mahanna. I'm the chairman of the ECES. But I earn my living in the cement business, the tire manufacturing business, and the insurance business. It's a great pleasure, in fact, for me to welcome you at ECES today. I believe it's a rather important event. The intention is to discuss the key issue of concern for Egypt, unemployment policies, and job creation for youth. A big topic, a big problem, but I'm sure we'll get there. The importance of the topic, in fact, stems from the huge size of unemployment in Egypt, especially among youth. Just to cast light on few figures that would show the magnitude of the problem, I would call it. The overall estimates of unemployment in Egypt is went down to about 11.9, but the unemployment among the youth is about 25%, 25 plus. Youth representation in the total population is about 60%, so it aggravates the situation. This in fact reflects the underlying importance of the topic and explains why we see it as a real challenge for sustainable development. We are very pleased today to have three very distinguished panelists. Dr. Asad, the Regional Director for Egypt, Yemen, and Djibouti at the World Bank. Mr. Abdel-Latif, Founder and Chairman of Sawari Ventures. And Ms. Christine Hoffman of the ILO. I'll pass the floor and give the mic to Abla to say a few words, and then before each speaker will come to introduce his presentation and topic of discussion, I'll be represented one by one. So Abla.
Thank you, Mr. Omar. Good morning. Now, just to have this diversity, I'll be talking in Arabic, yes, and always to take advantage of the interpretation services that we are having today. Hello, good morning at ECES, at one of our events. Actually, we have like 3 to 4 slides to trigger the discussions and to present the work we are offering. Why are we interested in this topic? In addition to what Mr. Omar just said, there were some points of interest. The unemployment rate, as we all say, this is what we all know, but we also add the labor underutilization that is defined as those working under 40 hours per week. That is whenever they wish to work. When we combine both figures, we are talking about a quite significant figure, because as per the definition of the ILO, those who are working more than 40 hours per week, less than 40 hours per week, this is unemployment. But when we are talking about job creation for youth, we have to realize that we have a real problem regardless of the official figures. The unemployment rate, the highest unemployment rate among youth between 15 to 29 years of age. That's the dark column. That's from 2011 to 2016. The highest rate is 26.6. when it comes to unemployment, and the highest unemployment rates for university graduates, that is the educated people, are those among whom we have the highest unemployment, not those that are not educated. We hope that those who are graduated can work in the field of their background. And concerning the employment policy, we would like to tackle today how the World Bank evaluates such policies in Egypt. Do we have clearly defined employment policies? The other topic, along with the ILO, showing projections for job opportunities in the different sectors. That is very useful to know. And the third question is what we need to create jobs on the short and the long term, and what is the difference between this one, the short and long term, because it has to do with different angles and dimensions. And lastly, how to attract youth to the current job opportunities, just to be down to earth when we tackle this issue. And now we can give the floor to Dr. Asad.
So our first panelist is Dr. Asad Alam, who is currently Regional Director for Egypt, Yemen, and Djibouti at the World Bank. In this position, he leads the development and implementation of the World Bank's country partnership strategies for these countries. Prior to taking up his post, Dr. Alam served as country director for Southern Africa, covering South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland. Dr. Alam is a published author on various topics, including productivity, growth, poverty, inequality, trade, and fiscal issues. He's an Indian national, and he holds a PhD in economics from Columbia University. The floor is yours.
And the great friend of ECES. There's the friend bonus. It has to be added to the.
We don't mention the facts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Abla, also for providing the perspective on the challenge of youth unemployment, or the challenge of creating jobs for young people. You mentioned, Omar, that I was in South Africa before that. You know, in South Africa, we had a huge problem of youth unemployment. So unemployment among young people was very high, especially among the disadvantaged community. But among the university-educated young people, unemployment was very low. Even among the disadvantaged community, the unemployment was in low single digits. Among young people who had not gone to school, it was very high. And I worked in about 29 countries around the world. This region, the region of Middle East and North Africa, and Egypt, and many of the countries in this region have this unique phenomenon where you have higher rates of unemployment among university graduates than you have among the non-university graduates. And I think that gives us pause to think about what is the education system producing. Are they producing young people with the skills that the businesses need, that Omar and other businesses, or the ECES or the employers, and many of you are people who employ young people. So this is actually a fundamental challenge in terms of what is the education and the skills set that is being produced and whether it has market relevance or not. So my presentation is somewhat broader, and if you don't mind, to talk more broadly about the challenge of job creation, because I think you need to have an ecosystem that helps create jobs before you start thinking about how to actually tailor that towards more jobs for the youth and for women, because this is another challenge for Egypt, where the labor force participation among women generally is very low in the region, and that Egypt is part of that same story. And if we have done some analysis in the World Bank that shows that if the female labor force participation was to rise to the same level as for men, the whole GDP for the entire region, I think the Middle East and North Africa region, would be something like 44% higher. 44% higher. So I think the whole region is losing a lot by not having women in productive employment. And I think one can do similar analysis if we were to get more young people, and a lot of the young people are of course women also. So let me actually talk a little bit more broadly about this is a provocative title, The Secret of Job Creation. I'm no wizard here, but I do want to actually talk a little bit about, some of the ingredients what I believe are essential for creating jobs. So some years ago, the World Bank did we have these flagship studies, the World Development Report, and that actually focused on jobs. So this just provides a little bit of a scheme of things. Development is not successful if it doesn't create jobs. So if you want to reduce poverty, you have to create jobs. If you have to address inequality, you have to create jobs. If you have to promote social stability, you have to create jobs. I read some numbers produced by others, it's not my number, that suggests that Egypt needs to create like 1 million jobs a year, in order to address the demographic bulge that is working itself through the system. And if you were to try to at least do something to address the stock problem. So you have to take care of the flow, but do something to address the stock problem. So that's about 85, 90,000 jobs a month. India is producing 1 million jobs a month. 1 million jobs a month. So this is the number that I have. Well, India is also 12 times bigger in size than Egypt. But India is a success story where you have the private sector, and it is all in the private sector. The government is not. The government is not a major engine of job creation in India. So it's really the private sector. So a lot of it, what I will be talking about, whether it's improving living standards, productivity, social cohesion, it is really a story about jobs. And I think what Omar, you started saying that jobs is the fundamental challenge before Egypt. That is absolutely critical. So I'm providing a very simple framework, and it is, what we call miles, just to make it easy to remember. M stands for macroeconomic policies, having the right macro policies. I for having the right investment climate. So in some ways these address the demand side of job creation. L for labor market and institutions, E for education and skills, and S for really having social protection, a system that can actually also support the skills development and the labor market orientation of a lot of the poor and the vulnerable. So for me, we just put it out there as miles because it's easy to remember. So, and wherever I've used it, people find it useful, and I hope you'll also find this structure useful to remember. And I think I'll just go down each one of these things in my slides, and then we can have a broader conversation in question and answers if you want. So let me give you some examples of what I believe works in terms of creating this ecosystem. There was this big study done called the Growth Commission that was done led by a group of experts from around the world, including I think Mahmoud Mohieddin was also part of this group, and it was led by Nobel laureate Pence. Professor Pence was headed this group, and they came up with various ideas for what works and what doesn't. And there's a lot of work that has been done around the world in terms of how do you actually create jobs. So I'm trying to put together, synthesize some of the analysis from different pieces. So when you think about macroeconomic, I think the fundamental thing is having a competitive exchange rate. If you look at how China's in some ways one of the key pillars of China's economic strategy that has led to the boom in China has been having a competitive exchange rate. And that has been, when you look at India's reform efforts in 1991, it started with the exchange rate reforms. And I'm very pleased that Egypt in some ways also anchored it in actually having the exchange rate reforms of November 2016, which I think is an anchor and a linchpin of the whole competitive environment in the country. Low inflation, I think a lot of these things I don't even have to argue because I think these are self-evident truths, so to speak. Of course, you need to have low, and I should also say stable inflation, because if there's a lot of volatility, then it's very difficult for businesses to actually even predict and how to actually develop your financial plans if there's a lot of inflation or volatility in that. Openness to trade and investment. And this sometimes becomes controversial because there's a notion that if you you reduce your trade barriers, open it up to imports from other countries, domestic producers might be hurt and it might be disruptive. But if you want to really create a competitive environment in the country, because the world is there's a lot of cutthroat competition in the world, And it is a survival of the fittest in the business world. And those of you, and I'm sure Omar will agree that profit margins are constantly being squeezed as new players are coming into the market. And even though Egypt may be a large market, but Egypt has to play in the global market, and Egypt has to have a vision of being a global player when it comes to international trade in goods and services. And for that, you need to have openness to trade, and investment is essential to attract investment and to be able to profit from the global environment. And I'm not going to talk about the challenges of the global environment. I think we are going through a certain business cycle, and things are changing very rapidly. Low and predictable rates of taxation. Again, these are all very self-evident things, but of course you need to have a tax structure that generates enough resources for the investments that a country needs. And if you look at the savings rate in Egypt, they are very low. Savings rates in Egypt are around 14%. No country has had a takeoff unless the savings rate has been in the high 20s, around 30%. If you look at China's savings rates, that is very, very high. Singapore has had historically very high savings rate. Now, of course, that was a different model, that was a different time. India took off when its savings rate went up close to 28 or 29%. That is when India took off. So unless a country, there's only so much that a country can do utilizing foreign savings, and using that for development. And there are limits to how much you can borrow. So unless a country actually mobilizes its own domestic savings, you cannot have a platform for industrial takeoff or for growth takeoff. Of course, that doesn't mean that you raise taxes a lot, because taxation creates its own challenges and incentives, and there are limits to also how much you can actually increase taxes without creating disincentives for businesses to invest. But the whole, and when I talk about savings, it's not only government savings that come from the budget, but also the whole savings in the private sector, because Egypt has very low private savings rates also. So when you talk about investment, so the second block, infrastructure, high quality infrastructure is essential to create the environment for businesses to invest in. Infrastructure investment is also very good because it creates a lot of jobs in the production of that infrastructure, but these may not be permanent jobs, as we have seen. There's only so much, especially when it comes to public investment in infrastructure, there's only so much jobs that you can actually create through public investment. Increasingly in the world, the investment needs for globally are very, very large, including in Egypt, and increasingly it is the private sector that is coming in and making investments, whether it is in the power sector, as we have seen, $2 billion worth of investments now committed in the renewable space in Egypt, which is absolutely remarkable and a record. But I think from things from roads through ports, the whole logistics chain, and in some of the other hard infrastructure areas also, where one thought that these were domains for public sector investments only. But now increasingly, if you have the right enabling environment, if you have the right pricing arrangement, the right regulatory framework, there is a lot of interest for private sector also to come in and actually invest in the infrastructure. The favorable investment climate, and that covers a whole range of issues, everything from red tape and corruption to excessive regulations, etc. And we can have our own conclusions on where Egypt is on that space. Financial inclusion is a very important part of creating investment, and one normally doesn't. A lot of people don't even think about financial inclusion as an important part of the investment climate. But this is very important because this is a key element for ensuring that people at the lower end of the income spectrum have access to finance so that they can enter into entrepreneurship. And I'm sure this is something that Ahmed also, when he'll talk about, he'll sort of say how important financial inclusion is. One of the largest programs for financial inclusion that is going on is really in India, where the government has embarked upon triangulating three big things. And this is a mega program of triangulating a national ID system, where every Indian has a national ID, and I got mine when I was in India in December. It's a small biometric ID card. That is actually being connected with a whole host of service provision, so that is very good for service delivery and all that. But from a financial inclusion point of view, the second point of that, of what they are trying to do, is actually trying to deepened the banking penetration, people that have bank accounts, through an incentive program that got, I think in the first 6 months of that program, 150 million Indians set up bank accounts. And in return, they were provided a national insurance program for any catastrophe fees that they may have had. And then that is being triangulated with mobile banking. So I think this combination of the three is actually being seen as a major push towards a deepening financial inclusion, which is very important for fighting poverty and creating jobs at the lower end. Entrepreneurship, it's very clear that without a spirit of entrepreneurship and risk-taking behavior and an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship, you will not be able to generate the type of mass job creation that you want to see at the lower end of the income spectrum. And of course, competitive markets with new firm entry and exit. And in many countries, you find markets that are controlled, that are monopolized, and that does not permit entry and exit. And that is extremely important if you want to have new players in the market. If you just want to have the existing existing players, incumbents also only being there and be dependent upon the incumbents, that is one model. But if you really want to have more dynamism, more competition, I think it is important to make sure that there are no barriers to entry and exit. And that will facilitate new entry, that will facilitate that dynamic and competitive spirit that will help job creation. Labor markets, and I'm sure I know a colleague will also be talking about this, because this again goes on the supply side for how do you actually establish the greater flexibility and mobility in the labor markets. I used to work for many years on the countries of the former Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe, in Poland and Hungary, where mobility and flexibility historically has been very, very low. And that was a major problem for getting workers into the right type of jobs. So you had workers, and then you had jobs, and job matching became a huge problem. And I think that is an issue, at least used to be an issue also in Europe many years ago, where the structural challenges were very high. So one needs to really create in a dynamic economy the ability for workers to move and to actually get to where the jobs are. Labor standards, I'm a great believer in labor standards. I did my doctoral work on labor standards, and I am a great believer that good labor standards are good for jobs. So you'll be happy to hear that. In fact, my thesis was on labor standards and comparative advantage. So I think it is good for trade, and I think it is good for job creation and for the quality of life, living standards in a country. And of course, job search and training, and there are different models for supporting all of that. Education and skills, this is in some ways the biggest agenda, but the most difficult also, but this is more of a longer term agenda. So none of these things, by the way, are short-term quick fixes for job creation. Access, quality and equity of education system. I think, if you look at Egypt, we have very high levels of access, so access is not a problem, but quality is. And there is a lot of disparity in the education system, if you're coming from Upper Egypt or wherever you are compared to other parts of the country. So there's a lot of disparity. Lifelong learning is a relatively sort of new concept, but this is becoming increasingly important given the technological changes that are taking place, given how fast the market is evolving. And then it is also forcing people to even ask questions, what is education all about? What are the type of skills that you need to even produce or teach kids when they are in school or in university? Because the market is really, and I'm very curious to, a lot of people try to project out and look at future trends in the market and what sectors, but it is a very, very difficult exercise. And in the olden days, a lot of people they used to work on developing job ladders. In fact, my first research project was to figure out for one of the countries in Latin America, what are the type of things you need to do in order to get into different professions, to become an electrician, to become a doctor, or different professions. And people used to do with longitudinal data from household surveys, one could actually develop these job ladders and say, okay, if you want to become a plumber, what are the type of things you need to do? What is the typical profile that you need to develop? But now the world is very different and fast changing. So when my son 2 years ago came and said that I want to be a data scientist, I said, what is a data scientist? I didn't even know what a data scientist was. Now he was studying physics, and that I knew what physics was and what astrophysics was, and I could think of a career growth. But data science, but now it is a booming area. Then I had to educate myself about what data science is, and it is one of the fastest growth areas among university students, at least in Europe and in the United States, and now even in China, I'm told. So education and skills is a very dynamic space, and I think without unless a country actually invests in education and skills and really develops a platform for the future, it is very difficult to see how jobs can, sustainable jobs, I think, as Abla, you were saying, can be created. Now, social protection, and you may ask, why am I putting social protection in all of this? Because social protection is typically meant of, you have some poor people who, for whatever be the reason, are not able to benefit from the market. So you need to just provide some cash transfers or whatever and take care of them and protect them against destitution. So how would that help with jobs? Increasingly, I think there's a view out there that social protection is important first in order to provide some degree of insurance or risk coverage against unemployment, because there are cycles. And when people become unemployed and they don't have any financial support, they end up being unemployed for a longer period of time. So with social protection, there may be a way for these people to get back into jobs and to retain their skills. There's also a notion that through a proper design of social protection systems, you can actually link people back into the labor force, so that young people in poor households also can get access to training and to skills development that can get them a better chance of getting back into the workforce. So this link with productive employment, I think there's an effort or thinking in Egypt also. I think it's called Forza, which is opportunity. And I think if you look at Mexico also, Mexico has a very large program called Oportunidades, which is also focused on getting poor people into the labor force. So I think if you try to connect social protection with the labor market needs, I think then it becomes quite logical to think of it. So those are my 5 blocks of things on the secret of job creation. A lot of it is very tough to do, but I think one needs to really have a comprehensive package and a comprehensive view in order to make things happen. So this is just a slide to make you smile, and because everyone's job creation is now whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Europe, whether it is in every country, that is the #1 issue. Because in a rapidly changing world, it is extremely difficult to do, but that is the challenge before all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asad. Very enlightening, very inspiring. I still don't know what data science is. Before we give the floor to our second panelist, I'll ask Dr. Abla, in fact, to give us just the key messages that Asad was conveying to us.
Asad, as usual, kindly put the headsets on. As usual, Asad's presentations are very enriching and entertaining, precise and to the point. The highlights or the key messages include that we are one of the few countries that have high levels of university graduates that are not employed. Also, his point on female participation in the labor force. That if we are able to increase it, our GDP will be able to jump up to 44%, and Egypt needs to create 1 million jobs per year in order to be able to meet this unemployment problem. Meaning 90,000 jobs a month, while India is able to create 1 million jobs a month. And also, in order to be able to create this solid labor market, we have to focus on the miles. The points that he included are already well known to us, but they include the savings rate are very low, and no country is able to take off until their saving rate is up to the 20s or 30s. Otherwise, these countries will have to fall back on loans. But this entails a lot of burden on the state. The second point has to do with the investment in the environment, which include this is financial inclusion with all its different aspects have to be part of the business environment, and also we must have an ecosystem in order to encourage entrepreneurship. This is one of the points that that ECES is going to hold seminars on. He also addressed the education system. And he included two new components: the lifelong learning outside of schools and the market relevant skills, which means that the education system must be highly flexible and resilient. Also, the last part has to do with the social protection system. In order to protect people from unemployment and at the same time achieve social justice. When we talk about the employment policies, they represent a set of policies that complement each other within this view. And I would like to thank you for your presentation.
Abla, in fact, summed up very well what you said, but the only thing you referred to the saving rate as 20 plus. She was generous enough and said 30%, so she added 10%. You know, she's a generous lady.
Take off. Take off.